My apologies in advance if your question didn't make the list. I've got half a page here, and the exam paper was over 3 pages long. So again, apologies if your question didn't make the cut. The first one is, what is the significance of the heart center in Bhagavan's teachings? Is it fair to say that until one has had some experience, however vague, of the heart center, one cannot fully grasp the import of Bhagavan's core teachings, the Hridaya Vidya, that's knowledge of the heart? First thing to say about this, I think the heart center, just for background information, that's referred to in the question, is the one that Bhagavan said existed on the right side of the chest, which was the place in the body where he said consciousness arrived and emanated to the rest of the body. He said that after realization, one could feel this to be the core, the center, the place where bodily consciousness arose and withdrew to. But what he never did say was that it played a significant role in self-realization, insofar as it's not a place that you look at, contemplate on, put your attention on as part of your practice. Bhagavan himself has given several accounts of his self-realization, and in not a single one did he mention that he was aware of the heart center prior to his full realization. So I think we can say fairly confidently from that it's not an essential part of the process of realization, but that after self-realization, you can, if you're like Bhagavan, you can feel this place on the right side of the chest. There are people in the Bhagavan tradition, I'm thinking particularly of Lakshmana Swami, Saudama, who said that on the day of their own realizations, they felt the heart center immediately before full realization took place. In Lakshmana Swami's case, he said the question, "Who am I?" spontaneously appeared inside him, and as if in answer to the question, his I thought subsided into the heart center, and there he saw, witnessed, felt the smiling picture of Bhagavan on the right side of the chest, and then that picture disappeared and took the I thought with it, leaving self alone. And he said from that moment on, the I thought never arose or functioned in me again. So in his particular case, there was definitely a final precursor of realization, having this heart-centered sensation. Saudama recorded something very similar. I mentioned both of these case studies, if you like, to Papaji when I interviewed him in the 1990s. And I asked him if he had had any experiences of the heart center in his final stages of Bhagavan. And he gave me a very long, interesting story, which I never heard him repeat again, about he too had had some experience of this heart center. The first time he met Bhagavan, Bhagavan looked at him and he said he wasn't really expecting a big experience. He went there as a cynic, but he said somehow the heart made itself known to him. And he said, the heart of my heart, it was something not physical, not in a particular place. He just said, Bhagavan revealed the heart of the heart to me in that first darshan. So you can find people who've had this experience immediately before the final extinction of the I, but as Bhagavan himself has reported, it's not essential because he himself didn't have this experience. He did say that after his realization, he was aware of it on the right side of the chest as almost a kind of throbbing, palpating sensation. There's an incident, I think it's in Talks, where somebody asks about this, and Bhagavan invites the people around him at the time to put their hand on the right center chest and actually feel it. One of the people who was included in the list was Viswanatha Swami. So he was still alive when I first came to Ramanashram. So I said, what was it like to feel Bhagavan's heart center throbbing away on the right side of his chest? And he laughed and he said, I wouldn't dare put my hand on Bhagavan's chest. That's very inappropriate. I don't remember that incident. And even if he had invited me, I would have felt very shy about doing it. And my feeling is that this is an opportunity not only to touch Bhagavan, but to touch him in a major power center in the body. If Bhagavan had invited me to put my palm of my hand on his heart center, I would have jumped at the chance. But Viswanatha Swami somehow refuted the story in talk, said it never happened, and said he'd never put his hand on Bhagavan's chest, so he didn't have any direct report of what it felt like. So all of these stories about the heart center have inclined many people to believe that somehow you have to focus on this place, that you have to be aware of it as part of your sadhana. Bhagavan said that the I thought rises from this place instantly on waking. It goes to the brain, it breaks out, explodes in the brain into the world that we see around us, and simultaneously creates an internal observer of the external world. And from then on, we imagine that we're a person looking at the world, experiencing it, thinking about stuff, and so on. So he did say that to get rid of this idea that we're a person inside the body, you have to take this I back into the heart and make it disappear. He recommended self-inquiry for this, but he never ever said that self-inquiry involved putting attention on the place in the body where he said the I thought arose from. This is important because it gives me a little opportunity to expound on why Bhagavan's teachings on inquiry work and why other teachings tend not to, because they focus on objects and not subjects. The rising I, which we take to be our individual self, imagines itself to be located in the body. And when Bhagavan says, find out the source of this I, we recollect that Bhagavan said, oh, it rises from this place on the right side of the chest. And so we instinctively think that we have to go looking for it in a place, in a location. And by holding on to that location, we somehow find the source by the effort and concentration of focusing on that particular spot. Now, what Bhagavan said is completely different. He said that the I exists and continues to thrive by attaching itself to objects that you concentrate on, that you identify with, that you associate with. So he said the I rises, it grabs hold of a thought object, a sense object, and then it sees another one coming along and it attaches itself to the next and the next and the next. And he wrote and he said that this is like a caterpillar which won't leave its back legs on one leaf before it's got hold of the next leaf with its front legs. So this continuous moving from one thought object to the next thought creates the illusion of continuity for this risen I. And he said the way to abolish this sense of permanent individual selfness is to stop being attracted by all these objects that arise in front of you, to stop associating with them, stop identifying with them. And he said, if you can put the I in a state where it's no longer clinging to objects it wants to concentrate or focus on, it can't subsist by itself. It cannot exist in isolation without identifying with a thought, an idea, a perception. So when you sever it from all the things it wants to think about, it spins around rather like a gear, failing to find something else to mesh with. And then very, very slowly it subsides back into the heart and disappears. Now, if you think about what happens when you concentrate on the heart center, you're doing exactly the opposite. You are putting your focused attention on an object that's a place in the body, and assuming that through the intensity of your focus, your search, your intent, you can actually experience what this center is like and how it's functioning. There's a lovely analogy that Bhagavan gave to Annamalai Swami. And Annamalai Swami, when he first came to Bhagavan, he asked for a mantra, and Bhagavan didn't usually give mantras, but in his case, he said, repeat Shiva Shiva. That was the mantra which Bhagavan almost invariably gave out if devotees asked for one. Sorry, but my camera or internet froze for a few minutes. I have no idea why, so I stopped it and decided to start again. I mentioned that Bhagavan had, at Annamalai Swami's request, had given him the mantra Shiva Shiva to repeat, and that independent of that, he had been told or he'd read that Bhagavan recommended focus or awareness of the heart. So he assumed that this was the heart center, which he'd read about or been told by other devotees. So he started concentrating on the heart center. And Bhagavan came across this by Annamalai Swami told him, and Bhagavan said, no, don't do that. This is not how you're supposed to do focusing on the heart. And then he gave a wonderful metaphor. He said, the heart center is like the electric meter on the side of the house. It's the place in the building where the universal current enters that specific location, and from that location spreads out to all the various rooms and sockets that are distributed throughout the house. So I like this analogy. When Annamalai Swami told this story, he elaborated on it. This is not Bhagavan's elaboration, but I think Bhagavan would support this. And Annamalai Swami said, I understood from Bhagavan's comments about the meter box that just as you cannot experience the flow of electricity by staring at the meter box all day, you can't experience the current, the flow of the self, by staring at the place in the body where that flow of consciousness, of body identification enters and then rises to the brain. So after this little exchange with Bhagavan, he gave up focusing on the heart. Kapali Sastri quizzed Bhagavan about this. Kapali Sastri was a devotee of Ganapati Muni as well as Bhagavan. And in that particular school, they put considerable focus on putting attention on parts of the body. And he also attempted to get Bhagavan to explain or endorse his idea that he should be putting his attention on this place in the body. And he came up with this, possibly the best answer that Bhagavan gave on this. He said, you should try to have rather than locate the experience. I think this is the key line when Bhagavan talks about the heart center. It's not something that you find by putting attention on a place. It's something that you discover and experience for yourself by not connecting with thoughts, ideas, perceptions, and feelings. So the I thought, having risen, having connected with other ideas, other sensations, is not aware of its source and stays away from its source because it's continually jumping from one idea, one thought, one sensation to another. When it's stopped doing this, when you've made a strict, severe, continuous attempt to stop it making these connections, then it idles for a bit, and then it starts to go back to its source. So you find the source not by looking at it as an object in a place, but by holding onto it as a subject. The withdrawing I slowly goes back into the heart, disappears into the heart, and then you experience the heart as it is. This is the phrase that Bhagavan uses in the first verse of Oladu Narpadu. You don't experience the heart by running around trying to locate it, experience it as an object. You experience it by having the I thought disconnected from other objects, slowly withdraw into its source until it disappears in that source, and then you experience the heart as it is. So that was question one. That took longer than I expected. Question two, do you believe that it is Bhagavan who chooses his devotees? I like this question because there are several ways of approaching it. The first thing I would like to say is that as a jnani, as someone fully established in the self, I don't think Bhagavan made choices at all. I think the power of the self animated him. It made him do the things that he did. It made him do the things that he said. But I don't think there was a conscious body-bound individual in there who said, I will choose this course of action, or I will choose this person to be my devotee. That perceptual frame of reference was completely absent in him. But then we have to account for the fact, how did some people become his devotees? How did they end up at Ramanashram? How did some of them take one look and go away? How did some people fall in love with him, spend the rest of their lives there, and so on? I think category one, I think some people, no, not some people, all people, I would say, who have the good fortune to be in the presence of a jnani for any length of time have earned the right to be there. I think you do your practice, you work hard, you aspire for self-realization, you aspire for a teacher, and the merit you acquire from that intense desire for liberation gives you at some opportunity the chance to come and sit in the presence of a Sadguru such as Bhagavan. You may not know when your efforts took place. A good example of this is Narayana Iyer, who was a government civil servant who Bhagavan clearly had a lot of affection for, put a lot of attention on. And Narayana Iyer never really understood why he was such a favorite at Ramanashram. Ganeshan has written that one of the recurring conversations he had with Narayana was, why is Bhagavan giving me so much love? Why is he giving me so much attention? Why has he picked out me from all possible people in the world? Why did he make me fall in love with him? I don't feel in any way qualified or worthy. And there's no resolution of this in in Ganeshan's writings. But a couple of years ago, I read what was until then an unpublished manuscript which had been put together by Ella Mayart. She was a European devotee who spent time at Ramanashram in the 1930s. In 1938, I think Narayana Iyer was making his usual complaint in the hall, and he said, "Oh, why am I so lucky to be here? I've done nothing. I haven't done all the religious observances that the books, etc., etc." And Bhagavan said, "Your past is a very rich one. In some of those lives, you did what was necessary to bring you here." I think this is a really good story because I think it applies to everyone who we read about, the people who were attracted by Bhagavan, the people who came there, the people who fell in love, the people who spent their whole life in Bhagavan's orbit. At some point, we, and I say we, the current generation who never saw him in the body, we did something. We did something good, and we built up a large positive balance of punyas, if you like, and we're now reaping the benefits of our past activities. There's a paragraph of more abstract confirmation in Living by the Words of Bhagavan, and Bhagavan says that being in the company of a Satguru comes effortlessly to those who have worshipped God in past lives, done japa, tapas, pilgrimage, and so on. And then that reminded him of a verse from Tayamanavar, Paraparakani, and it's almost exactly what Bhagavan just said. He said, for those who have in the correct way embarked on a spiritual path by worshipping divine images, going on pilgrimages to holy sites, going to tirthams, a Satguru will come and speak the one unique word. Tayamanavar, amongst all the Tamil saints, he was one of the few who liked the phrase Summa Iru. Arunagirinatha was one, Tayamanavar was another. I like to think that the one unique word is also Summa Iru in this case, and that by doing all your past tapas, your past practices, you've earned the right to come and sit in front of the Satguru. Your good karma has brought you there. You sit there. Bhagavan or whichever Satguru you've earned the right to be with looks at you, bestows grace on you, says Summa Iru, the one unique word, and if all goes well, your business there is over. And then Bhagavan explained the verse a little bit. He said, only those who've done plenty of nishkamya punyas, these are spiritual activities performed without any thought of a reward in previous births, will get abundant faith in the Guru. If you have that abundant faith, then such a devotee will follow the path and reach the goal of liberation. So here is a clearly marked out course of action. You strive, you work hard. You may not know when your work was done because it was at some point in the past, but then fortuitously, a chance meeting, a book, a photo takes you to somewhere like Tiruvannamalai and gives you the opportunity to be with Bhagavan or to practice his teachings. Don't think you're better than anybody else. Just say, thank you, I've done the work, I've got the cash in the bank, now I can start spending it by sitting quietly with Bhagavan. I think part of the, how shall we say, the divine accounting is that the more work you've done, the more preparation you've put in, the closer a connection you're going to have with the Sadguru when you eventually show up, and the longer time that you'll be there. Two examples spring to mind from Bhagavan. Kiraipati, who was the lady who served Bhagavan on the hill. She cooked food for him. She served him. And the general consensus at Ramanashram was that her efforts and the merits that she earned in her life as a servant of the Satguru on Arunachala earned her the right to come back as Lakshmi the cow. And as Bhagavan said in his summary of Taimanavar's verse, her past efforts, her past tapas, her past practice put her at the feet of the Satguru, and in that birth, she attained liberation through his power and his presence. Others, for example, Madhava Swami, he was Bhagavan's attendant for 12 years. He served Bhagavan. He followed the Taimanavar prescription. He did his spiritual practice. He served the Guru for 12 years, which is a very traditional amount of time. Passed away, but not late enough for him to have the possibility to come back. He came back as Bhagavan's white peacock. Bhagavan never ever conceded that Kiraipati was Lakshmi, although everybody was under the impression that he knew it. He just refused to say it. But Bhagavan was prepared to say that the white peacock who came back had been Madhava Swami in a previous life. In fact, in one unguarded moment, Bhagavan was telling off the white peacock for misbehaving. And he said, you didn't listen to me last time around and you're not listening to me now. So occasionally he would make comments that more or less confirmed what was going on. The next, how shall we say, aspect of this is once you've been attracted by Bhagavan because of all your merits, your punyas, your previous practice, what decides how long you stay, what kind of career you have at the Satguru's feet, and do you even have the possibility of leaving? I think there are a few examples of devotees who came to Bhagavan who had obviously earned the right to be there, but for one reason or another, they were not happy with the environment at Ramanashram, and they tried to run away, and things went so badly for them that they were compelled to return. I will tell two stories in this vein. Annamalai Swami came for a few weeks, and somehow he didn't like what he thought was the chatter, the gossip, the politics of Ramanashram, and decided he wanted to go off to a solitary place where he could do meditation by himself. So without telling Bhagavan, he ran away. He went north, ended up in Polor, town about 33 kilometers north of Tiruvannamalai. Everything went wrong for him. He couldn't get anything to eat. He tried begging. Nobody would bring him any food. He was starving. He was cold. He was hungry. And then he thought, no, this was a mistake. I should go back to Ramanashram. My screen froze again, so I'll carry on where I thought I got to when the freezing started. So Annamalai was on his way back to Tiruvannamalai, a little bit humbled he had decided that he was better off at Ramanashram. He had no money, so he thought he would try to be a ticketless traveler. No, before he got on the train, having made that decision, he found someone who invited him in for a meal, gave him a sumptuous feast. So as soon as he took the decision, I need to be back at Ramanashram, everything went well. So having been fed, he then went to the train station, hopped on the train, and hoped nobody would spot him. There was a ticket inspector on the train, and Annamalai Swami told me I was completely invisible to him, that he went all through the carriage demanding tickets from everybody except me. He just walked past me without asking for anything. When I got off at the other end, the man who collects the tickets at the ticket barrier at Tiruvannamalai station, he paused in front of him, not knowing what to do, and the inspector looked at him and said, "You've already given your ticket, go on, you're holding up everybody else." So everything went well. Having taken that decision to go back to Bhagavan, everything went well. He went back to Ramanashram, confessed to Bhagavan that he had run away because he wasn't liking ashram life, and that his attempts to run away were all thwarted. But as soon as he took the decision to come back, everything went well, including the miraculous invisibility on the train home. And Bhagavan looked at him and said, "How can you leave without having first done all the things that you are destined to do here?" So I think Bhagavan knew that he had a destiny to be at Ramanashram for a long time, that running away wasn't an option, wasn't a possibility. He could try it, but he knew that it would all go badly, and that as soon as he took the decision to go back to Tiruvannamalai and stay with Bhagavan, everything went so well, you could almost say miraculously well. He was invisible to the ticket examiner on the train and the ticket collector at Tiruvannamalai station. So you can see from this that there is a kind of destiny. Bhagavan famously said once that we're all like the prey that's fallen into the tiger's jaw, the deer that's fallen in. Once he gets his teeth into you, that's it. You can wriggle and squirm, you can try and get away. But after that moment, your destiny is with Bhagavan. And if you try to run away, it's just not going to work. The other person whose story I love is Natesha Iyer. Natesha Iyer was a very junior cook in the ashram kitchen. And in that position, he was being constantly bullied by the Brahmin widows, who were the head cooks and the people who bossed everybody else around. He put up with it for a while, and then he decided that this is not for me. I'm going to run away. He, at that point in his life, had a physical aversion to touching money. It burned his skin if money ever came near him. So his only option was to walk home, and his hometown was Chidambaram, which is a very, very long walk away. So he set off one day, and at the end of the first day, he didn't tell Bhagavan, at the end of the first day, he found a quiet place off the main road. He said he found a hollow tree stump. He thought that would be a good shelter for the night. And he was just about, he had a bath, and he was just about to curl up inside the tree trunk and try and get some sleep for the night, when Bhagavan appeared in front of him, a vision of Bhagavan, and said, "How far have you managed to go from me?" At which point Natesha Iyer realized that there was no escaping from Bhagavan, that his attempts to run away would be futile, and that he could never leave Bhagavan. He said the form, the vision of Bhagavan, then started walking back down the road towards Tiruvannamalai. Natesha Iyer decided he wasn't even going to have his night's sleep in the hollow tree. He started walking back towards Tiruvannamalai. This is a long walk, by the way. Tiruvannamalai Villapuram is 60 kilometers. He'd earned his night's sleep in the tree, but he turned around and spent the whole night walking back to Tiruvannamalai, presented himself in the hall much as Annamalai Swami had presented himself, chastened by his failed escape bid. Bhagavan hadn't known that he was going, and of course it wasn't the real physical Bhagavan who appeared to him near Villapuram. But Bhagavan looked at him and said exactly the same thing that the former Bhagavan had said the day before. "How far do you think you can go away from me?" He said, Natesha Iyer just said, I burst into tears. and realized that my home was Ramanashram, and that from then on I would put up with whatever went on in the kitchen. That was my destiny, to be surrendered to all the events at Ramanashram. I will say, not putting myself in the category of these people, but in my own case, back in the early 1980s, by then I'd lived at Ramanashram, I'd worked at Ramanashram, and rather like Annamalai Swami, I thought, I'll just go away and live independently. I'll meditate by myself, but for that, I need to earn some money. I didn't have any money in those days. I thought, I'll go back to the UK, I'll get a job, I'll earn some money, I'll come back, I'll live outside the ashram, quietly mind my own business and not be dependent on anyone. Like all the previous attempts to run away, this didn't work. In London, I failed to find employment of any kind whatsoever. I was reasonably educated, I had certain qualifications. Every time I tried to apply for a job, I got turned down, and sometimes in quite a rude and unnecessary way. I applied for one job for which I was eminently qualified, and received a letter that said, "Dear Mr. Godman, thank you very much for your very entertaining application. However, we would prefer to employ someone who is qualified to do the job." I thought, well, that's a bit cheeky. I wasn't having high expectations. One of my friends was working in the London Zoo, sweeping up all the garbage, and I thought, well, that's a nice outdoor job. I like animals. I can work outside. So he got me an interview with the lady who hired the litter pickers at London Zoo, and I even managed to blow that interview. Apparently, I left at the wrong moment, and the lady decided I wasn't serious enough to be a litter picker in the London Zoo. So I didn't get that job either. This went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then I just had a chance meeting with the landlord of my neighbor's house, who was a philosophy lecturer, and he had come to London to deliver a manuscript written by his wife, who was also a philosopher, to a publisher in London. And I had a thought. I thought, well, oh no, and then he said, I talked to the publisher, and she discovered that I was also a philosophy lecturer, and she said, why don't you write a book yourself? We're always looking for new, good philosophy manuscripts. So the thought arose, well, that's something I could do. I could go back to India and write a book. I got the name of the publisher, the lady, the commissioning editor, picked up the phone, and it was like Annamalai Swami's story of everything going wrong until you took the right decision, which in my case was to go back to India and write a book. I picked up the phone, and the lady on the other end said, who are you? What do you want? I explained who I was. I said where I came from, and I said, I'd like to write a book on Ramana Maharshi, please. And she just said, don't go anywhere else. Come immediately. We want you. Now, I hadn't heard the phrase, we want you, for a very long time. Everybody else had said, go away, go away, go away. And without seeing me, knowing who I was, even who Ramana Maharshi was, she just said, come immediately to my office, which I did, and sat down, and about half an hour later, I walked out with a publishing agreement to write Be As You Are. I came back to India and realized, well, that seems to be my destiny. It wasn't my destiny to go and earn a pot of cash in the West. I came back to Ramanashram with a book contract, started writing books, and that's more or less been my own personal destiny ever since. There's a very nice paragraph, I think it's in Maharshi's Gospel, where he said, if you're not destined to find work, no matter how hard you look, how hard you try, you won't find it. That was my case in London. I wasn't destined to earn money to put in the bank to go back to India to live off. It was my destiny to come back to India and write not just one book, but a whole series of them. As soon as I accepted that that was my fate, everything went well. I started this what's turning into a very long answer by saying that Bhagavan doesn't choose his devotees because he has no sankalpa. He has no capacity to say, okay, I like you, you can be my devotee. No, you're not so good, I reject you. But there is a way of looking at this phenomenon which, in a sense, does imply some kind of selection, some kind of choice. Bhagavan liked the verses of Guhai Namah Shivaya. Guhai Namah Shivaya was a Tamil Saiva saint who lived on the hill about 500 years ago. In the first decade of the last century, Bhagavan lived in his temple, in his compound. And while he was there, he found unpublished manuscripts of Guhai Namah Shivaya's poems. He even made a copy of all the poems. I found that book in the ashram archives when I was working there in the 1980s. But there was one verse that particularly struck him because he used to bring it out once in a while. And it says, Arunachala attracts to itself all those who are rich in jnana tapas. So what this means to me is that if you have a serious interest in liberation, a strong desire to find a guru, a past history of spiritual practice, a willingness to do more tapas, spiritual practice in the future, then somehow you show up as a dot on Arunachala's radar. That's the best image I can think for this. Imagine there's one of these big, 360-degree sweeps on the top of Arunachala. It goes round and round, and those devotees who have a connection, a past, a determination to make a big spiritual effort, somehow you make a blip on Arunachala's radar, and at that point, Arunachala starts to pull you in. As the verse says, Arunachala attracts to itself all those who are rich in jnana tapas. Bhagavan himself said it was the power of Arunachala that drew him to Arunachala and made him stay. And I think it's the same power that's pulling people today. We all have a respect and a veneration for Bhagavan, for Arunachala. Bhagavan told one person who said, I came to you, you attracted me, you pulled me here. And he said, oh, that's just what you think. You identify that pulling force with this physical form that you now see in front of you, and you say, oh, Bhagavan, you brought me here. But I know that the same power that brought me to this mountain has now brought you to this mountain. And that same power, that same force is pulling all people who have an interest or a passion for liberation, enlightenment, or Bhagavan's teachings. Sorry, I had another freezing crisis. I was just about to sum up this particular question by saying that to some extent we've all earned the right to be in the company of devotees who followed this path. We've all been pulled to Bhagavan, to Arunachala by a force that we don't understand, can't remember why, we might feel unworthy, but I think we've all done something to be in that company of devotees, to be sharing this satsang here today, and to have a common interest in revering Arunachala and in following Bhagavan's teachings. So that leads on to the next question. Do you miss the physical proximity of Arunachala when you were away from it? Right now, as I explained, I'm several thousand miles from my usual location. I'm in Western Australia. I don't miss it because I feel that I can always be in Arunachala's presence by being aware of it, by thinking about it in a loving way that perhaps physical proximity doesn't always do. Last time I checked, there were 150,000 people or so living in the town of Tiruvannamalai. I suspect for the vast majority of those, Arunachala is a landscape feature and not much more. The people who are in proximity to it are those who revere it, those who think about it, and that thinking is not dependent on physical proximity. Remember Bhagavan himself, when he was a boy in Madurai, said that he was thinking about Arunachala very intensively. On one occasion, he told Rangan, one of his schoolboy friends, that when I was playing with you, you were all indulging in the games. I was just being sucked into the inner silence that Arunachala was pulling me into. So there was this very strong connection between Arunachala and Bhagavan right from an early age. And when he came to write his poetry, it was full of references to this attractive, magnetic power of Arunachala. And on a couple of occasions, he was quite forthright in saying that the thought of Arunachala had brought about his own realization. So it wasn't because he was at Arunachala, just the intensity of his thought, his desire, his love had brought about that particular event. There's a story, I think it's a Ramakrishna story, but it illustrates this very well. Sounds like a Ramakrishna story. He said there were two teenage boys deciding what to do with their evening, and one of them, the pious one, decided he would stay home and study Bhagavatam, and the other one, the not so pious one, decided he'd go off to the local brothel, which shocked the first boy. Anyway, so they both went off to their chosen activities for the evening. The boy who went to the brothel spent the whole evening thinking about his friend who was reading Bhagavatam, saying, oh, I should have stayed home. This is terrible. I'm committing a sinful act here. I should be back home reading the Bhagavatam like my friend. And his friend who was back home, allegedly, aspirationally reading the Bhagavatam, was thinking, I bet my friend's having a good time in that place. And he was imagining what his friend was getting up to in the brothel. So the bottom line of this story, according to Ramakrishna, is that the boy who spent the evening at home with the book was where his mind was, and that was in the brothel. And the boy in the brothel was where his mind was, which is back home reading the Bhagavatam. So it's where you put your mind, that's where you are. If you put your mind on Arunachala, then you're in the proximity of Arunachala. If you love it, long for it, desire it, then that attention, that focus can, as Bhagavan said, even bring about your liberation. Do I miss it when I'm away from it? Not so much, but I have to say that the reason I don't feel badly about being away from it is that I know I can always go back. This is a big issue for me, particularly as a foreigner who doesn't have the right to spend the rest of my life in India. I'm always, to some extent, at the mercy of rules and regulations in India. I have never, ever left India in a situation where I didn't have the right to come back. This is something very, very important for me. For about 6 months this year, the Indian government locked India down, cancelled all scheduled flights, and even suspended all the visas and residential documents of people such as myself living in India. I could have gone to the airport and got on a plane, a repatriation plane to my own country, the UK, but had I gone that route, they would have stamped my passport in Chennai with visa expired, back in India. Is it working again? So I definitely didn't want that. So I waited at least 6 months until India started to relax its regulations a little bit. And as soon as those regulations allowed me to leave and come back, then I started looking into flights. There was a long and tedious way of getting to where I am, but I took it because I know that when the time comes for me to return, I have a document, a piece of paper, which will let me back into India, let me back into my house where I can sit on my veranda and look at Arunachala again.